A chilling stillness filled the forgotten storage facility on the outskirts of Las Cruces, the kind that settles only when something long undisturbed is finally exposed. As investigators unlatched the rusted door, a cold draft rolled out, carrying the unmistakable weight of a discovery that would upend decades of unanswered questions. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The winter of 1983 had arrived early in southern New Mexico, laying a thin frost across the desert city of Las Cruces. Locals prepared for Thanksgiving gatherings, early Christmas shopping, and the slow seasonal rhythm that came with shorter days and colder nights. Yet beneath the holiday spirit, a case was forming that would leave a quiet imprint on the community, eventually fading into archival dust until circumstances forced it back into the light decades later. This case centered on a missing young woman whose disappearance began as a local concern, but evolved into a prolonged mystery that not even family, journalists, or seasoned investigators could untangle. The woman at the center of the investigation was 22-year-old Caroline Mendez, a college student who worked part-time at a downtown bakery known for its holiday pies and cinnamon rolls. She lived alone in a modest apartment off Solano Drive, attended classes at New Mexico State University, and was described as responsible, punctual, and deeply attached to her small circle of friends. As Thanksgiving approached, Caroline completed her shifts, prepared for finals, and spoke briefly with relatives about possible Christmas plans. There was no indication that anything was amiss. On the night of November 28, 1983, after an evening shift spent serving customers eager for holiday desserts, she signed out, stepped into the cold air, and walked toward the parking lot. She was never seen again. Her car remained where she had left it. Her apartment showed no sign of forced entry or unusual disturbance. Her bank account inactivity and absence from work raised concern within hours. A missing persons report was filed the next morning. Police canvassed the area, retraced her steps, and interviewed coworkers who recalled nothing beyond routine end-of-shift fatigue. The city entered December with holiday lights strung across Main Street, but the atmosphere among Caroline's family and investigators shifted toward an uneasy dread. Flyers were posted on bulletin boards, telephone poles, and storefront windows. Local newspapers printed her photograph beside brief notices requesting information from the public. Over the following weeks, as Christmas approached, the search expanded into rural areas east of the city, where desert scrub and quiet ranch land stretched into the horizon. The winter sun cast long shadows, and search teams combed through arroyos and fields, hopping to find a trace of Caroline or her belongings. Nothing surfaced. Witness accounts remained vague and inconsistent. One person recalled seeing a young woman near a gas station on the evening she vanished, but the sighting was never confirmed. Another citizen claimed to have spotted a distressed woman entering a pickup truck near an abandoned lot, but the description failed to match Caroline. Without solid leads, the case began to stall. Throughout December and into early January, Caroline's family pushed for attention from state agencies, but the holiday season and a lack of evidence limited resources. By the time New Year's Eve arrived, investigators found themselves reviewing the same set of reports, circling the same unanswered questions, and hopping for a break that never came. The case entered 1984 as a missing person investigation with diminishing prospects. The years that followed shifted Las Cruces through numerous changes: economic development, population growth, evolving police procedures, improved forensic capabilities. Yet Caroline's file remained static. It lingered in cabinets, referenced only during periodic case reviews. The storage unit that would one day prove pivotal stood unnoticed along a quiet access road, rented under a false name and paid for as routinely as any other unit. It contained possessions that no one connected to the missing woman, and it would remain locked, ignored, and quietly accumulating dust. By the 1990s, the investigation had faded from routine departmental consideration. Some believed Caroline had left voluntarily, others suspected foul play but lacked evidence. Cold case units formed, reorganized, and shifted priorities. The Mendez family endured years of unanswered holidays, setting out a small candle every Thanksgiving and Christmas in remembrance of Caroline. Local reporters occasionally revived interest in her disappearance, especially during December segments about unsolved cases, but nothing substantial emerged. In the early 2000s, forensic expectations changed dramatically. Advancements in DNA technology revitalized numerous cold cases across the country. Las Cruces investigators reopened older files, including Caroline, to determine whether any retained evidence might benefit from modern testing. Unfortunately, her case contained little physical material. Without new leads, it remained dormant. The turn came unexpectedly in the early winter of 2015, long after the case had settled into near-permanent obscurity. The breakthrough arrived not through new forensic results, but through a routine facility audit conducted by the owner of the old storage complex. Payment on one particular unit had ceased. The account information was outdated, and attempts to reach the listed renter failed. Following the facility's policy, the owner arranged for the contents to be evaluated before auction. A locksmith removed the padlock. The temperature drop inside and the undisturbed condition of the space caught the owner's attention. Amid boxes, sealed trunks, and old furniture stood one object that seemed oddly out of place: a faded duffel bag containing personal items, including a student ID card from New Mexico State University. The photograph, though softened with age, belonged unmistakably to Caroline Mendez. The discovery reopened the case officially. Investigators carefully transported the entire contents to a controlled environment. Each item was cataloged, photographed, and examined for potential forensic material. The presence of Caroline's ID raised immediate questions. Who rented the storage unit under a false name? How had her belongings ended up there? Were they placed shortly after her disappearance, or much later? Was the renter someone previously interviewed, or someone entirely unknown to the original investigation? Detectives reconstructed the rental history. The unit had been leased in December 1983, exactly 2 weeks after Caroline vanished. Payments had been made consistently for over 3 decades, all through money orders purchased from various locations across New Mexico and occasionally Texas. The false name listed on the rental agreement resembled an alias used in one minor arrest record from the early 1980s, belonging to a local handyman who frequently drifted between seasonal jobs. His name had appeared briefly in the original investigation, a man who had once performed maintenance repairs at the bakery where Caroline worked. At the time, he had provided a vague but seemingly harmless statement, and was dismissed as irrelevant due to lack of evidence. Now, the financial trail connected him to the hidden storage space. Investigators retrieved archived employment records, police reports, and tenant logs from the 1980s. The handyman, identified as Victor Hale, had lived intermittently in Las Cruces during the period surrounding Caroline's disappearance. He left the area abruptly in early 1984 and had only sporadic footprints in official records afterward. His relocation history revealed a pattern of brief stays in small towns across the Southwest, interspersed with long gaps of untracked activity. The discovery of the abandoned unit suggested he might have preserved Caroline's belongings for reasons unknown, raising further suspicion regarding his involvement in her disappearance. Inside the storage unit, additional items connected indirectly to Caroline surfaced. A small box contained her work apron from the bakery, lightly dusted with flour residue. Another sealed container held holiday receipts from local stores dated November 1983. A journal with blank pages was discovered beneath folded clothing that did not appear to belong to her. These inconsistencies heightened the sense that the unit served as a private archive, maintained by someone, attempting to conceal or preserve items linked to the missing woman. Forensic teams processed each object using updated methods unavailable during the original investigation. DNA swabs, fingerprint lifts, and trace material collection were conducted meticulously. Some items yielded partial fingerprints. Others bore small fibers and minute biological traces. The duffel bag containing Caroline's ID produced the most promising material. A degraded but viable DNA sample adhering to the inner fabric was extracted using advanced techniques designed to recover genetic profiles from aged evidence. The sample was run through modern databases. Weeks passed as labs confirmed results, verified contamination controls, and compared the recovered profile with known individuals. Holidays approached again, another December layered with memories of Caroline's unsolved disappearance. But this time, the season carried a different weight. The long-awaited match emerged. The DNA belonged to Victor Hale. This connection pushed investigators into a new phase. They examined Hale's decades-old statements, reviewed the original interview summaries, and analyzed discrepancies. They traced his last known address to a remote community in western Arizona. Local authorities assisted in locating him, uncovering that he had passed away in 2011 from natural causes, leaving behind no immediate family and a sparse paper trail. Though initial reactions were mixed, some feared that Hale's death would prevent resolution. The forensic alignment between the storage unit, the abandoned belongings, and his confirmed biological presence provided the missing bridge. Investigators shifted toward reconstructing his movements, interviewing surviving acquaintances, and evaluating whether Hale could be definitively connected to Caroline's final known hours. Yet one major question remained unanswered. If these were her belongings, and if Hale had stored them, what had happened to Caroline herself? The absence of remains, direct eyewitness testimony, or confessions complicated efforts to confirm the full truth. But the renewed investigation was only just beginning, and deeper archival work would soon reveal a path towards solving the decades-old disappearance. The reemergence of the Mendez case in late 2015 shifted the tone inside the Las Cruces Police Department. What had once been considered a dead end gradually transformed into a methodical, evidence-driven inquiry, fueled by the belated discovery of a hidden archive. Investigators revisited each detail of the original reports, pausing over overlooked statements, dated assumptions, and gaps that reflected investigative limitations of the early 1980s. They recognized that the forensic breakthroughs of the present offered new leverage, and even without a living suspect, a complete resolution remained possible if the timeline could be reconstructed with precision and corroborated by material evidence. The first priority became tracing the origins of the items inside the storage unit. Some objects were obviously connected to Caroline, while others carried ambiguous provenance. Analysts examined manufacturing dates, retail stamps, faded labels, and temperature-driven decomposition patterns to estimate when each item was placed inside the space. The earliest entries aligned with late 1983 and early 1984, matching the timeline of Hale's sudden departure from Las Cruces. The condition of several cardboard boxes suggested that they had been untouched for decades, maintaining the same compressed dust layers and internal humidity patterns consistent with long-term storage. The DNA match to Hale strengthened the belief that he had personally handled Caroline's belongings, but investigators still needed to determine whether Hale acted alone, whether he had taken possession of the items as part of a crime, or whether some unknown connection allowed a less direct explanation. They identified several individuals who had once associated with Hale during his brief employment in Las Cruces. Interviews were conducted, many of them with retired workers, aging acquaintances, or family members of deceased colleagues. These conversations portrayed Hale as an introverted man who worked sporadically, rarely socialized, and kept to himself. No one recalled anything overtly suspicious, though a few described him as someone who watched more than he spoke, a characterization that aligned with the minimal documentation in his original police interview. Investigators searched for any surviving rental receipts, mailbox registrations, or financial links that might further place Hale in the area during the crucial window surrounding the disappearance. Some fragments emerged from microfilmed city records, a utility application under a different alias, purchase logs from a hardware store, and a mention of his presence at a temporary work site near the bakery where Caroline had worked. None of these findings directly implicated him, but collectively they indicated a familiarity with the neighborhood where Caroline vanished. The most significant development came from re-examining the bakery's old maintenance records. Hale had been dispatched to repair a faulty door latch 2 days before Caroline disappeared. The work order placed him inside the building near closing time, giving him the opportunity to observe employees as they left the premises. Investigators noted that the rear exit, which staff occasionally used, opened into a dimly lit alley bordered by dumpsters and delivery crates. In 1983, this area had minimal visibility from the road, creating a vulnerable point in the building's layout. Though no evidence existed to confirm that Caroline had used that exit on her last night at work, the possibility could not be dismissed. The winter of 2015 transitioned into early 2016 as analysts pieced together the timeline. They cross-referenced Hale's known movements with the discovery dates of the rented storage unit. The payment history indicated a pattern of consistent deposits despite his transient lifestyle. Investigators theorized that Hale maintained the unit because he believed its contents held significance, sentimental, incriminating, or otherwise. Long-term storage of evidence connected to a missing person suggested deliberate concealment, even if his motivations remained unknown. As the case expanded, detectives began exploring areas along Hale's historical travel routes. Though he had died years earlier, his movements reflected a consistent pattern: remote areas, temporary work contracts, and unregistered living arrangements. It became necessary to assess whether any unidentified remains discovered during the 1980s or 1990s along these routes might correspond to Caroline. This required cooperation with multiple jurisdictions across New Mexico and Arizona. Case files, dental records, missing persons logs, and unidentified remains reports were compared systematically. For months, the process yielded no connection. Some records lacked adequate forensic detail due to age, while others had been destroyed or lost. During this process, a retired investigator from Arizona reached out after recognizing Hale's name from an unrelated inquiry conducted in 1992. Hale had been questioned briefly in connection with a transient dispute near a rural work camp, but was released without further action. However, the officer remembered him mentioning that he avoided driving at night because of old roads that carry bad memories. At the time, the statement was dismissed as general unease. In retrospect, the comment carried new weight. Investigators reviewed satellite imagery, forestry records, and historical surveys of areas Hale had traveled through. By cross-referencing the locations of his seasonal employment sites with estimated travel corridors, they narrowed the search to several isolated regions where he might have disposed of additional items tied to the disappearance. It was in one of these areas, near a forgotten gravel turnout along a remote section of Highway 180, that a small breakthrough occurred. During a targeted ground scan conducted in early spring, forensic archaeologists detected metallic anomalies beneath compacted soil. Careful excavation revealed fragments of a rusted latch and hinge consistent with a portable metal storage box from the early 1980s. The box had deteriorated almost entirely, but small remnants survived: fabric threads, fragments of paper, and a partially preserved key ring holding a single corroded key. The design of the key matched the era and was later confirmed to fit a type of apartment mailbox commonly used in Las Cruces in 1983. Though weathered and incomplete, this discovery extended the chain of items likely associated with Caroline and placed Hale along a path that aligned with his abrupt departure from New Mexico. Laboratory examination of the fabric threads revealed fibers matching a brand of winter coat sold in Las Cruces during the early 1980s. Caroline's family had mentioned in early interviews that she owned such a coat, purchased during a rare cold season. The possibility that these fragments belonged to her strengthened the belief that Hale had removed items from her possession before leaving the city. Yet even with this progress, the most critical component of the investigation remained missing: any trace of Caroline herself. Without physical evidence confirming her fate, prosecutors could not issue a formal case closure. The search intensified along corridors Hale traveled, but results remained elusive. Still, the cumulative evidence demonstrated intentional concealment and a consistent pattern linking Hale to the disappearance. Attention turned next to the financial trail Hale had left behind. Though he used money orders, investigators located a handful of retailers that still retained scan records. One retailer displayed security footage logs from the early 2000s showing an older man purchasing money orders identical to those used for the storage unit. Though grainy and lacking facial clarity, the man's build, posture, and clothing style aligned with known photos of Hale. This decades-long pattern indicated deliberate efforts to maintain the rental unit long after any plausible innocent explanation. Psychological profilers reviewed Hale's behavioral patterns. They concluded that the long-term concealment of personal belongings suggested a fixation rather than impulsive theft. Such behavior often involved a desire to exert control long after the victim was gone. Though these assessments were not presented as definitive evidence, they supported the broader framework of the case. As summer turned to fall in 2016, investigators shifted focus toward closing the legal gaps necessary to declare the case solved. Hale's death meant there would be no prosecution, but the state still required a rigorous evidentiary linkage. Analysts reconstructed the timeline from Caroline's final shift to the disappearance of her belongings. They demonstrated that Hale was present in the bakery area the day she vanished, had direct access to the employee exit, and was the only documented individual who interacted with both the building and the items later found in the storage unit. The inclusion of Hale's DNA on an item intimately associated with Caroline created an irrefutable forensic link. Combined with the timing of the storage rental, 2 weeks after the disappearance, and decades of concealed payments, investigators assembled a sequence of events indicating that Hale had taken possession of Caroline's belongings immediately after she vanished. Though the absence of remains limited the investigative narrative, the accumulated evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Hale had been responsible for Caroline's disappearance. Before finalizing their findings, investigators reached out again to Caroline's surviving family members. Many had aged significantly since the case began, carrying decades of uncertainty. They provided additional personal details, including a handwritten description of Caroline's typical belongings, which matched several objects in the storage unit. Their recollections helped solidify item identification and contributed emotional context to the factual reconstruction. By late 2016, a comprehensive case summary was prepared for state review. It included forensic analyses, archival documentation, reconstructed timelines, geographic modeling, and witness statements collected over a span of more than 30 years. The conclusion reached by investigators was that Caroline Mendez had been abducted by Victor Hale on the night of November 28, 1983. Hale concealed her belongings in a rented storage unit, maintained it for decades, and evaded further suspicion until his death. The exact details of her final moments remained unknown, but the responsibility for her disappearance was established with sufficient legal certainty to close the case. This decision marked the beginning of the final phase, one that would bring closure not through courtroom testimony, but through the weight of evidence accumulated over decades of persistence. The holiday season approached once again, mirroring the time when Caroline had first vanished, but now carrying the promise of long-delayed resolution. The conclusion reached by investigators in late 2016 brought a measure of clarity, yet the process of formally closing a decades-old disappearance required further scrutiny. Legal consultants, forensic specialists, and archival analysts reviewed the reconstructed timeline to ensure that each claim rested on verifiable evidence. The task was not only to determine responsibility, but to build a narrative that honored procedural accuracy, satisfied legal standards, and provided the Mendez family with a definitive account after years of uncertainty. It was not unusual for cold cases to conclude without the physical recovery of a victim. Yet the burden of proof demanded a coherent chain of evidence that demonstrated Hale's involvement decisively. The investigative summary began with the discovery of the storage unit, a pivotal turning point that transformed the case from a dormant file into an active inquiry. The items retrieved from inside served as the foundation for the renewed investigation. The presence of Caroline's student ID card alone created an undeniable path back to her final days. But the importance of the unit did not end there. Its rental date, December 1983, provided a chronological anchor, situating Hale's actions directly after Caroline's disappearance. The multi-decade rental payments reinforced the notion of deliberate concealment. When examined through forensic, behavioral, and logistical lenses, this singular storage unit revealed the quiet persistence of a secret that Hale had guarded until his death. The investigative team constructed a chronological narrative of Hale's behavior around the time of the disappearance. They reviewed witness recollections from 1983, adjusting for the difficulty inherent in memories spanning more than 30 years. Several bakery employees recalled a maintenance worker present shortly before Caroline disappeared, though they did not specifically identify Hale at the time. Their descriptions aligned with early police notes. A man performing repairs, moving between the front and back areas of the bakery, leaving without drawing attention. He was perceived as a background presence, unremarkable, forgettable, yet positioned in precisely the right place to observe employee routines. Investigators noted that the maintenance request Hale handled involved a malfunctioning latch that could have influenced how staff exited the building. Such environmental factors mattered. They shaped opportunity, access, and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Cold case analysts revisited the geographical layout of Las Cruces in 1983, studying archived city planning maps, property records, and building permits. The area around the bakery had changed over the decades. A parking lot had been resurfaced, a nearby alley restructured, and several buildings demolished or repurposed. Yet the original configuration revealed a layout that offered partial concealment from public view. The employee parking area sat adjacent to a narrow service corridor where deliveries were received. Street lamps provided only scattered illumination, and the nearest commercial property closed earlier in the evening, leaving long stretches of darkness. Such details provided context for how an abduction could occur without immediate witnesses or audible disturbance. Hale's movements in the days that followed Caroline's disappearance were also examined. A sparse paper trail, utility cancellations, brief employment logs, and witness statements indicated that he left Las Cruces soon afterward. Investigators traced his route through scattered administrative records, constructing a pattern of rapid departure and deliberate distancing from the city. This timing aligned precisely with the rental of the storage unit, suggesting that Hale returned to Las Cruces briefly to secure the space before traveling onward. Forensic specialists continued to evaluate the limited biological material recovered from the storage unit. The degraded DNA profile taken from the duffel bag had been sufficient for identification, yet technicians sought supplementary confirmation. On several other items, particularly on the inner seam of the work apron, trace biological particles were discovered, though too minute and deteriorated for complete profiling. Still, their presence supported the theory that Hale handled more than one item belonging to Caroline. Further chemical analysis of dust layers inside the unit revealed stratification, consistent with long-term undisturbed storage. This reinforced the conclusion that the items had been placed there shortly after the disappearance and remained untouched for decades. The early 2016 recovery of the deteriorated metal lockbox fragment in Arizona became another focal point. Though its contents had largely disintegrated, the surviving key and coat fibers offered essential corroboration. The keys fit with an apartment mailbox model commonly used in Caroline's complex, did not serve as direct proof that it belonged to her, yet it strengthened the circumstantial alignment between Hale's travels and the handling of her possessions. Additionally, meteorological records helped determine how long the lockbox had been buried. Based on soil mineral deposition patterns, researchers estimated that the box had been concealed in the area during the mid-1980s, placing it temporally close to the period when Hale had been traveling through Arizona following his departure from New Mexico. Investigators presented these findings to state forensic advisors who evaluated the cumulative weight of the evidence. Though no single piece constituted a full explanation on its own, the interconnected structure of the material told a consistent story. Caroline's belongings traveled along the same routes Hale traveled. Items were concealed in storage or buried at remote sites. Financial ties linked Hale to the early stages of concealment. His DNA physically connected him to the property that Caroline had last been known to possess. The sum of these details, aligned chronologically, geographically, and forensically, produced a compelling portrait of responsibility. The inquiry then turned to understanding Hale's background. Though psychological profiling could not assign motive with certainty, it helped frame patterns consistent with the long-term retention of items linked to a victim. Interviews with individuals who had known Hale decades earlier painted a portrait of a man who drifted between jobs, rarely forming close relationships. His work history was fragmented across various towns, often involving short-term maintenance or repair roles. Employment supervisors described inconsistent performance, frequent absences, and a quiet demeanor that drew little attention. Some mentioned that he preferred working late or alone, habits that aligned with opportunities provided by night shift maintenance calls. There was no documented history of violent behavior, yet early police records noted 2 occasions when Hale had been questioned in minor disturbances near transient work sites. Neither incident yielded charges or clear evidence of wrongdoing, but the reports hinted at a pattern. Hale often placed himself in peripheral roles near vulnerable or isolated individuals, whether through coincidence or deliberate choice. These patterns, combined with his connection to the bakery maintenance job and his unexplained possession of Caroline's belongings, contributed to a broader understanding of his potential involvement. One intriguing detail emerged from tax records indicating that Hale had once lived in a trailer park located behind a stretch of road that Caroline drove frequently. This proximity may have given him an opportunity to observe her routines beyond the brief maintenance encounter. Investigators could not confirm this definitively, but the possibility reinforced the notion that the disappearance may not have been impulsive. The calculated concealment of belongings afterward further suggested premeditation, or, at the very least, a sustained awareness of wrongdoing. The final task for investigators involved aligning every known fact with legal standards for case closure. Without the possibility of prosecution, due to Hale's death, the focus shifted to establishing the highest degree of certainty possible within the constraints of the available evidence. State guidelines required demonstrating a direct relationship between suspect and victim through physical, circumstantial, and behavioral indicators. The DNA match, the timing of the storage rental, the survival of Caroline's belongings, witness recollections placing Hale at the bakery, and the geographic trail linking him to buried traces all converged toward the same conclusion. By early autumn of 2016, a comprehensive report was submitted to the district attorney's office. It detailed every investigative step, outlined the forensic results, and presented the logical framework supporting the conclusion that Hale had abducted and likely killed Caroline shortly after she left work on the night of November 28, 1983. Though lacking the ability to fulfill the traditional standards of trial evidence, the report satisfied the threshold for formal case closure under cold case resolution guidelines. The district attorney's review acknowledged the thoroughness of the reconstructed investigation. Decades of technological advancement had finally permitted a case, once considered unsolvable, to reach clarity. The decision to close the case was rooted not in speculation, but in the careful assembly of physical evidence, documented behavior, and scientifically supported timelines. A formal statement was drafted for release to the public, recognizing the persistence of investigators across generations who had contributed to uncovering the truth. Before announcing the closure, authorities met privately with the Mendez family. Time had changed them. They were older, quieter, and carried the weight of unanswered holidays. They had learned to live with uncertainty, yet the absence of resolution had left a constant undercurrent of sorrow. When investigators presented the findings, they did so with restrained precision, focusing on facts rather than speculation. The family learned that Hale had maintained the storage unit for decades, preserving Caroline's belongings. They heard about the forensic linkage, the geographic movements, and the reconstructed timeline. Although no final resting place had been found, the evidence provided a definitive answer regarding who had taken Caroline and where responsibility lay. The family expressed a mixture of relief and sorrow. Closure did not remove grief, yet it provided an anchor where once there had been only uncertainty. Authorities offered continued support should any future discoveries arise, though they acknowledged that the likelihood of recovering additional evidence remained low due to the passage of time. As winter approached once more, Las Cruces prepared for holiday events similar to those that had filled the city during the year Caroline disappeared. Lights were strung across the familiar streets. Storefronts displayed decorations. Seasonal community gatherings returned. But now, for the first time in more than 3 decades, the case that had lingered quietly in the background of the city's history carried a defined ending. The Mendez family could at last begin to navigate forward with the knowledge that the truth had been uncovered. Though the final announcement had not yet been made public, the investigative team completed their final reviews, preparing to move the case into a resolved status. As December neared, the same month that had once marked the height of uncertainty, the story of Caroline Mendez moved steadily toward a conclusion that would eventually be shared with the community. A sober reminder of persistence, evidence, and the long arc of investigative work. The public announcement of the case closure required careful coordination between investigators, the district attorney's office, and local officials. Though the findings had already been shared with the Mendez family, the broader community still knew the disappearance only as a decades-old mystery that resurfaced occasionally in news archives or anniversary articles. The release of the final report would bring an official end to the uncertainty that had lingered since 1983. Authorities prepared statements grounded in factual clarity rather than dramatic presentation, emphasizing the application of modern forensic science, the re-examination of archival evidence, and the methodical chain of investigation that had led to the resolution. The announcement was scheduled for mid-December 2016, ensuring that the family had time to absorb the findings before the public learned of them. It coincided with a seasonal atmosphere similar to the one present during the weeks after Caroline vanished. The quiet winter mornings, the early sunsets, and the steady movement of holiday traffic through Las Cruces reflected a city in its familiar rhythm, unaware that a chapter of its past was about to close. Local reporters received advance notice of a press briefing labeled as a cold case update, though few suspected that the long-dormant investigation would finally reach its conclusion. When the briefing began, officials described the renewed investigation triggered by the discovery of the abandoned storage unit. They outlined the forensic process that had identified DNA linking Hale to Caroline's belongings, the historical records that reconstructed his movements, and the evidence demonstrating that he had maintained a concealed archive for more than 30 years. They discussed the significance of the metal lockbox fragments found in Arizona, the reanalysis of witness accounts, and the modern investigative framework that allowed these disparate elements to form a coherent narrative. The presentation was meticulous, avoiding sensational language while underscoring the strength of the evidence. Reporters took notes, recognizing the unusual nature of a cold case solved so long after the initial disappearance. Public reaction unfolded slowly as the details circulated through news broadcasts, printed articles, and community conversations. Many residents had been too young to remember the original investigation, while others recalled the missing person flyers that had once appeared in windows and on telephone poles near the bakery district. Some expressed relief that the case had finally reached clarity. Others felt renewed sorrow as the memory of Caroline's disappearance resurfaced. The Mendez family received condolences from neighbors, friends, and individuals who had followed the case over the years. Their responses remained private, but the knowledge that the truth had been established offered a foundation for reflection. Meanwhile, investigators completed the administrative procedures necessary to classify the case as resolved. Archival files were updated with final reports, forensic analyses, and summaries detailing the conclusions of the 2015-2016 inquiry. The storage unit's contents were either preserved as evidence or, where appropriate, returned to the family. Items that could not be fully identified due to degradation remained cataloged under controlled conditions, ensuring that future technological advances, should they arise, could still be applied. Although Hale could not face legal consequences, the documentation created a formal record assigning responsibility with a high degree of certainty, contributing to the broader field of cold case methodology. Authorities also conducted internal reviews to evaluate how earlier investigative limitations may have affected the case's trajectory. In 1983, forensic technology was limited, and missing adult cases often lacked immediate resources unless evidence of foul play emerged early. Caroline's disappearance, though treated seriously, had suffered from these structural constraints. The re-examination decades later proved how advances in DNA recovery, digital records retrieval, and cross-jurisdictional collaboration could shift outcomes dramatically. These reflections were not intended as criticism of past efforts, but as part of an evolving understanding of how long-term cases should be managed. As winter progressed, Caroline's story began to settle into its final place within the community's memory. Local newspapers published retrospective pieces recounting the original disappearance, the years of uncertainty, and the eventual breakthrough. Some articles highlighted the role of persistence in cold case investigations, noting that even small discoveries, such as a long-abandoned storage unit, could provide critical openings. Others focused on the challenges faced by families of missing persons, emphasizing the importance of continued advocacy, record preservation, and cooperation between agencies. Beyond Las Cruces, regional law enforcement agencies referenced the case while reviewing their own archival files. The discovery that Hale had traveled extensively prompted several jurisdictions to revisit missing persons reports from the 1980s and 1990s, though no additional links to him surfaced. Still, the renewed attention demonstrated how the resolution of one case could inspire broader reassessment efforts, contributing to a larger network of investigative awareness. The case served as an example of how incomplete or overlooked evidence could still hold significant value decades later. The Mendez family approached the holiday season with subdued reflection. The knowledge that Hale had been responsible for Caroline's disappearance brought a kind of closure, but it also revived the emotional weight that had accumulated over decades. They found themselves revisiting memories of Caroline's final days, her preparations for Thanksgiving, her anticipation of Christmas, and the ordinary routines that had unfolded before the night she vanished. Even without the recovery of remains, the confirmation of responsibility allowed them to shift their focus from uncertainty to remembrance. They held a private gathering in her honor, emphasizing gratitude for the resolution and acknowledging the enduring impact of her absence. In January of the following year, investigators conducted a final review meeting before officially closing the active case file. They discussed not only the investigative steps taken, but also the unique circumstances that had made the resolution possible. The abandonment of the storage unit had been a matter of timing, an overdue payment, an unresponsive account, and the facility's standard procedures. Without that sequence of events, the case might have remained unresolved indefinitely. The meeting concluded with recognition of the collective effort across agencies, laboratories, and archival departments, illustrating how collaboration had turned a long-dormant case into a resolved one. As months passed, the community absorbed the details of the resolved case. The bakery where Caroline once worked had long since changed ownership, but a few employees who remembered her created a small corner display featuring her photograph and a brief tribute. It was simple, understated, and aligned with the quiet tones of the investigation that had finally uncovered the truth. The storage unit facility, now aware of its inadvertent role in the case's resolution, implemented updated policies for record retention and unit audits, ensuring that no similar oversight would stretch across decades again. The broader implications of the case continued to influence discussions within forensic and investigative circles. The example underscored that even cases lacking physical remains could reach resolution through circumstantial evidence, biological traces, and methodical reconstruction. Training seminars referenced the investigation as a model for how to integrate historic evidence with modern forensic approaches. A comprehensive internal report emphasized the importance of cross-referencing financial records, rental agreements, and utility logs, highlighting how seemingly mundane information could become central to identifying patterns of concealment. In the years that followed, Caroline's case remained a touchstone for cold case investigators in New Mexico. Although no further developments emerged, the resolved status provided a foundation for continued learning. Law enforcement agencies expanded their archival digitization efforts, ensuring that future cold case inquiries could draw upon organized, accessible records. The improvements in data systems, inspired partly by the persistence demonstrated in solving Caroline's case, contributed to efficiencies in other investigations across the region. The location where the deteriorated lockbox fragments were discovered remained unmarked, a quiet turnout along an isolated stretch of highway. It had no plaque or indication of its relevance, yet it represented an essential piece of the investigative puzzle. The remote setting underscored the complexity of tracking historical evidence left by transient individuals. While the area itself changed little, its meaning within the context of the case became part of the private understanding held by investigators who had participated in the search. By late 2017, most active discussion surrounding the case had subsided. The Mendez family gradually resumed their routines, carrying forward the knowledge that the truth had been uncovered. They did not seek public recognition or tribute. Instead, they maintained a private tradition during the holiday season, lighting a small candle in honor of Caroline, a gesture that had once symbolized uncertainty but now represented remembrance. The difference was subtle but profound. Where once they had waited for answers, now they acknowledged a life remembered and a mystery resolved. Years continued to pass, and the case became part of the documented history of cold case investigations in the region. It held a reserved place among examples of evidence perseverance and the long arc of forensic science. Law enforcement training programs referenced the importance of re-examining even the smallest details. Storage facilities across several counties implemented revised policies that considered the potential significance of abandoned units. While these changes were not direct tributes, they reflected the broader impact of a case resolved through diligence and the unexpected discovery of a forgotten space. In Las Cruces, the winter holidays each year carried a different undercurrent for those familiar with the case. The festive lights, the faint hum of seasonal activity, and the quiet streets at night all evoked memories of the time when Caroline disappeared. Yet the story no longer carried the weight of uncertainty. Instead, it served as a reminder of persistence, methodical inquiry, and the often unseen work that unfolded within cold case archives and forensic laboratories. The final chapter of the investigation closed not with dramatic revelations, but with the steady, reasoned conclusions of law, science, and record. The truth emerged from evidence long hidden, preserved through the passage of time, and ultimately revealed through the determination of those committed to uncovering it. The case of Caroline Mendez, once defined by absence, became defined instead by resolution, quiet, factual, enduring. Though no courtroom heard the full account and no suspect stood trial, the legal outcome remained clear. Responsibility rested with Victor Hale, whose long-maintained concealments had ultimately exposed his involvement. The city of Las Cruces moved forward, carrying the memory of the young woman whose disappearance had shaped decades of quiet concern, and whose case had finally reached its rightful conclusion.